A man walks into a court. He's charged under Section 63 of the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act 2008 with an offence of extreme pornography for allegedly being in possession of a video of a woman having sex with a tiger. This video has never been watched by the prosecution. Nonetheless, he's been arrested at his home address. Police have executed a warrant, taken him to the police station, interviewed him under caution, where he has been represented by a solicitor. He has been bailed to the magistrates' court and then sent to the Crown Court. Finally, at the Crown Court, the judge asks to see the material in an administrative hearing. There's a moment of extreme terror across the court as they expect to see a woman having sex with a tiger. Play is pressed. Turns out it's a man in a tiger skin costume who turns to the camera and says, "That beats advertising Frosties for a living." Now, if this isn't ridiculous, this ruined a man's life. He became a joke. The story went viral across the global internet, and his life was ruined because this law was misunderstood. So what I'm saying to you is there is a significant risk of this happening to any one of you here today as a consequence of these misconceived laws. And on that note, I would like to hand over to my co-organiser, Pandora Blake.
I like spanking. I always have. I mean, it's great, right? What's not to like? It's queer, it's non-penetrative, you can do it with people you might not want to have sex with, it gets your circulation going and your endorphins flowing, it's fantastic, it gets to role play and dress up, which I love. It wasn't until I got online in the 90s and found some free previews for online pornography, which I wasn't legally old enough to buy access to, that I realised there were other people in the world who had the same fantasy, and that I wasn't the only kinky pervert on the planet. It made me realise that maybe I wasn't such a freak, that I didn't have to feel ashamed, and that I might find happiness and fulfilment after all. So this is one of the reasons I make pornography, is to help people who maybe are isolated in rural communities, who don't know that there might be a BDSM scene, to realise that they aren't alone and that there's nothing wrong with them. My colleague Miles, who, the rock star lawyer over here, represented the defence in 2 trials in 2012, which were about content depicting things like anal fisting and male BDSM. And in both of those trials, a jury of the British public unanimously ruled that these acts were not obscene. Now, if that isn't an indication of what the British public currently thinks, then I don't know what is. And there's meant to be some sort of legal system on which the guidance is updated in the wake of this case law, and it hasn't been updated. So if a new piece of legislation like the Digital Economy Bill is going to be brought in March, then at the very least we need these guidelines to be reviewed before that happens, so that the law isn't any more out of date than it currently is. The bottom line is that none of us deserve to feel ashamed of our sexualities or of what our bodies naturally do when we have sex. None of us deserve to feel ashamed of what we fantasize about or the kind of sex we have, as long as it's consensual. Consensual adult sex should not be criminalised, and nor should any porn that depicts it.
BBFC has a long history in content classification, but it has no history or expertise in cybersecurity or the mechanisms by which we protect privacy. I think it was this guy who started talking wistfully about wishing that the government would open up the passport database to help with age verification and the DVLA database. So all of a sudden you're talking about not the system that the government says it wants, which is one where the site merely knows whether or not you're over 18, but not who you are, to a system where everything is known and surveilled and linked to your real-world identity. And there are all sorts of reasons why you should oppose that. Ashley Madison has provided a great example. It's a huge target for hackers, and it's, you know, speaking as somebody who writes a lot about cybersecurity, it's just a really terrible idea. And don't think that it will merely apply to people who look at porn, because if these systems start to encroach on other databases, it will affect everyone who's in any database.
This case has its roots in a law from 1861. That's the year that Prince Albert died. That's the year that Queen Victoria went on for another 40 years in mourning. And that case in the 1990s that was passed by a court that used to sit in that building just there, that court no longer exists. The judges that sat in that case are dead, and yet that law continues to criminalise consensual adults in this country. It's an outmoded law, it's an outdated law, and it's a law that frankly needs to go and needs to be reformed.
Like all of the other forms of legislation that have been targeting pornography over the last decade, this one claims to have a research base that demonstrates that there are issues for children and that there's an issue of safety for children with regard to pornography. The fact is that that research base doesn't exist.
Many young gay people, LGBT people, use sites like Twitter, Tumblr and Snapchat as their way of coming to terms with their sexuality, slowly discovering and exploring. The plan is to include such sites as these under the verification rules. What about gay men fighting AIDS or the Terence Higgins Trust with their information on keeping people safe from HIV? Are those kind of education sites going to be affected by these rules if they have a picture of somebody putting a condom on, for instance, which is very important education? The LGBT community, and gay men in particular, have suffered disproportionately from our draconian obscenity and sex laws. In 2012, Simon Walsh had his life turned upside down, openly gay barrister who lost his job with the Mayor of London after tabloid stories, but who was eventually found by a wise jury to be not guilty of possessing extreme pornography. 12 good men on that jury decided that the images that the CPS and police were prosecuting him on, which were things like sounding and fisting images, were not actually obscene. The same with Michael Peacock in front of us, the gay escort, who was found not guilty of distributing gay pornography DVDs of S&M, fisting and water sports. But I want to make one very simple point about fisting and water sports, two of these things which are highly legal under British law, but actually both of which from an HIV perspective are entirely safe from HIV. So essentially what we're doing is we are stopping young gay men from learning and seeing about the very things which could keep them safe from HIV. I think it's time for a grown-up debate in the UK, and I think it's time for the police, the CPS and the government to start treating us as the sexually mature adults that we are. Society will gain.
Some MPs, particularly women MPs who call themselves feminists, to criminalise sex workers' clients. Not only, we're against this completely, not only will it impact sex workers financially, it will also, worse than that, make it much more dangerous for sex workers to work and force us into isolation.
Just as with the banks and know your customer regulation, or the supermarkets and licensed premises with licensing regulation, they will err on the side of caution, which means to say they will take more information than they need, and they will seek to pin, in the way that the official mind works, the identity to the age, to the user. And that is a danger to us all. Not only will more information be collected than is necessary, but it means that we will also lose our capacity to have different personae for different purposes.
Why on earth will we try and just cover up something to consenting adults having consenting sex just because it's not quite to our taste? Oh, let's just cover it up and hope that it goes away. That's stupid. Can't we just promote a culture of actually educating our children, actually talking to our children and each other, and hopefully they'll grow up to understand sex and consent and enjoy sex when they're older in a responsible way? Surely that's the clever way of doing it, but anyway.
So, thank you once again to all of our speakers who have been amazing today, and thank you for coming down, and thank you to the Metropolitan Police for bringing their very impressive handcuffs and keeping a close eye to ensure that we are fully disciplined.
She watched Channel Zero. Call it a comeback. I've been here for years, rocking my beers and wanting something fair, making the tears rain down like a monsoon. Listen to the bass go boom explosion. Overpowering, over the competition, I'm tarring a record shot. When I drop these lyrics that'll make you call the cops. Don't you dare stare, you better move. Don't ever come back. I'm going to knock you out. Mother says knock you out.